Prepping is when you spend time before and then receiving cutting cards and writing blocks. I know you've heard us talk about blocks, but blocks, if you don't know, they're pre-written answers to different neg contention or ask contention. You're going to want to decide different strategies that you want to go for during the tournament. For example, against an econ contention, do you want to go for the 2020 contention, right? So like these different arguments, you're going to want to decide how you want to respond to them. And it works both on the app when you're both AF and egg in the round. So like if you're AF and you're responding to the 2020 contention, which arguments are you most comfortable going for in your final focus and in the summary speeches? So that like both you and your partner are on the same page. And that means that your summary and final focus will have a clear line connecting them so that your opponents can't say, oh, these were new arguments, and your judge can't be like, oh, I don't know what's happening. Like these two speeches were great, but about different things. Also, you're gonna need to talk with your partner. I know Megan talked about this a little bit, but you need to decide who is the first and second speaker if you haven't already. Omer can probably explain this a little better than I can, but the first speaker is going to be more attentive and the second speaker is more analytical. Omer, do you want to expand on what that means?
Sure. Basically, the first speaker does the constructive speech and the summary. So the first speaker usually wants to, well, obviously both sides want to understand their case, but basically what the first speaker does is they want to be more attentive because the summary is kind of where you carry your arguments, and you also have to take into account what the other team said and what your partner said in your rebuttal, so that in summary you can pick and choose what you want to say, pick and choose how you want to weigh. Essentially, the summary is like one of the big, probably in my opinion, the most impactful speech. That's in my opinion. It might not be for others, but because it kind of like sets the ground for what the judge should be like judging it on. Because typically in summary you want to say, judge, you should judge it like this because like my partner said, so blah blah blah. And then second speaker is typically more analytical because he does the rebuttal and final focus. And in the rebuttal, that's mainly where you refute your opponent's arguments. So the second speaker wants to like while the opposition speaking their arguments, second speaker wants to think in his mind, okay, here's what I'm going to say, here's how I'm going to say it, this is how I'm going to get rid of their arguments, so on and so forth. So they want to be a lot more analytical with what they're saying.
Some things to keep in mind, you will generally, so at least for the format we're teaching you, so this modified PF format, the first speaker will be the first speaker regardless if you're AF or neg, and the second speaker will be the second speaker regardless if you're AF or neg. If you do like LD or policy, this might change a little bit, and if you choose to go into those events, I'm sure people will tell you why it changes, but yeah. There are different ways you can prep, and by ways I mean like literally physical ways to prep. You can be at your house by yourself and sitting in front of your laptop and possibly FaceTiming your partner. Not necessary. This is what you'll be doing a majority of the time when you're prepping, because there's just so much card cutting and like individual work that needs to go into it. But you can also have what I call the more fun version, which are prep sessions where your entire team, your team is typically determined by your school or whatever academy you're debating for. You go to someone's house or a park or like school if it's open. You eat food, listen to music, chat, and all prep together. You're discussing strategies. Kind of fun, great team bonding. Prep sessions are more rare than like you sitting at your house and prepping by yourself. So, but it's also great because you can prep with other people. As far as how you actually prep and when you prep, so there are two kinds of prep: the before tournament I'm cramming prep and the general prep. So before a tournament, so before at least a camp tournament, all of the different cases will be disclosed. So you should be able to prep out everyone's case. What I mean by this is you should have set strategies to answer different app contentions and neg contentions. So you're not like scrambling during the round going, I don't have answers to this 2020 neg contention. Someone help me because I don't know what I'm doing. During the year, so outside of this camp tournament, you'll be able to find out what other people read sometimes. Like this means is like if you've debated them before, then you likely know what ask contentions and neg contentions they have, especially if it's at the same tournament. If your friends have debated them, then they can tell you what they ran. And they might disclose this on a website. So for both LD and policy debate, there is this, and I believe PF, but it's less often used. There's a debate wiki where everyone says which argument they're running, and it's for the purpose of prep, so then everyone can prep out each other's cases. And this might sound counterintuitive because you're like, wait, people are prepping me out, but if both sides have good prep for a tournament, it leads to better debates, which is why people will disclose and why disclosure is always a good practice. And then when you're actually prepping, you need to do a couple things. So you need to cut new uniqueness before a tournament. So in case you don't remember what uniqueness is, it's a description of the status quo. And you need to do this for both app and net contention. Uniqueness typically changes from week to week because politics is always changing. So you could always cut uniqueness 2 to 3 days before the tournament. And sometimes there are just that happen in politics. So I know like when I was debating the immigration topic in policy 2 years ago, that was when there was all that discussion about building the wall and so there was a lot of discussion happening between the House, Senate, and Trump. And so it was like literally every day or sometimes an hour, 30 minutes before a round, I would be cutting new cards because there would just be new information that was being sent out. You can also cut entirely new contentions if something surprising happens or comes up. So if you don't follow the news, sometimes what leaders will do is if their particular agenda isn't going through, they might threaten a government shutdown. And government shutdowns have been threatened a couple times. So you might be able to cut an entirely new neg contention based off of this shutdown. It really just depends what's happening in politics. Shutdowns are not the only instance, but only scenario in which this can happen, but it's just a scenario. Right now, something that you could cut, although you shouldn't because cutting an entire contention in the next 2 hours would be difficult, could have something to do with all the Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter riots and everything like that, because that's obviously something that's happened fairly recently. Not a lot of our evidence talks about it, so it might be interesting to cut a new neg contention or ask contention, I don't know. And then the second kind of prep is your general prep. So depending on your event, you should be prepping during the year. The exception to this would be Parley because you get a new topic before your round. So it's a little bit more difficult to do prep, but you're spending a certain number of hours a week prepping. For policy, this might look more like 5 to 10 hours per week. For PF, it might look closer to 2 or 3 hours per week. And you're writing new cases, you're doing drills, you're doing redos. Redos are when you, after a debate you've done, either for practice or in a tournament, you go back to your flow and you're like, I don't really like how this speech turned out, or I think I could do this speech better. So I am going to do this speech. So I'm going to do this speech again, and I'm going to record it, and maybe I'll do it for like another teammate, or if you have a coach, you can do it for a coach, and they'll give you feedback on it. Do you do prep for Parley? So Parley prep looks very different from normal prep, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later because we will be doing an intro to high school debate. And yeah, so there's other ways you can prep. These are just some general ideas. The kind of prep that you will be doing right now will be basically just writing new cases. And if you want to do some drills, or if you think you're really weak in a certain area of debate, then you can like go to a TA's office hours and be like, I don't really know how to do crossfire. Can you help me? And they'll probably walk you through a couple drills to help you figure out how you should do crossfire. Yeah. So blocks. These might be a little weird if you haven't already written them or haven't already seen them, but they're pre-written and prepped answers to different positions and answers, different positions and answers to your case or something that you're writing to answer someone else's case. So you don't have to come up with new arguments every single time. They'll be typed out. They'll be in a nice format. I'll show you how to format them. You should have most positions blocked out before the tournament comes because people read the same things, even like during the year. but like at this camp tournament, you're limited to 3 or 4 different AF contentions and like 4 neg contentions. So it's like fairly obvious what people will be reading. During the year, you can check open evidence or other prep sharing sites. So I know like r/debate will sometimes have cards, and there's other random sites to find blocks. I wouldn't recommend like just using blocks that random people on the internet have cut, and you should probably cut your own blocks. A, because good practice, but B, because you know that the arguments you're making are legitimate. Writing a block. So I want you to remember back to your rebuttal lecture, like about how to answer things, and I'm actually going to give you a couple different strategies for answering neg contentions. There's a lot of random lingo on here, so I'm going to go through what it means. So the first strategy is to do non-unique, link turn, no link, impact defense, and have miscellaneous defense. What does this mean? So non-unique. Non-unique basically means that the neg contention has no uniqueness, i.e., like they say that Biden is going to win in the 2020 election, but no, Trump is actually going to win, and here's why. A link turn would be the neg says that the AF causes Trump to win the 2020 election, and so if the neg says that, then the AF would be no, we actually make it so that Biden will win the election. We ensure a Biden victory, right? And so all of a sudden, it's like all of this stuff that they're saying that's bad that Trump will be causing if he wins the election. Now you're solving for those bad things that will happen because you're ensuring that Biden will win the election. And then you can also read a no-link argument, which is just following the same story that I'm telling right now, or using the same example of the 2020 neg contention. They say that like immigration reform is going to be the most important part of the 2020 election, which is why the plan can't pass, but actually it's things like criminal justice reform, because people are really concerned about the riots or response to coronavirus. Things like that are going to be the central questions that voters are asking when doing stuff for the 2020 election. So clearly, like the AF doesn't really matter in terms of this neg contention, so there's no reason why you should evaluate it. You can have impact defense. What this means, it's a reason why the impact that the neg reads won't happen. For example, if they say that Trump is going to lash out, or that's, I think the impact we're giving you is like Trump just makes every nuclear escalation scenario happen. But you can just be like, no, Trump won't cause all these wars because he has like Congress and generals and stuff who are preventing him from pressing that big red button that allows him to order nuclear strikes. So yeah, so nothing's going to happen. And then you can also include other miscellaneous defense. Defense are reasons why the other team can't win, which is a weird way to think about things, but like I promise it makes sense in the future. So I guess I should teach you, have I taught offense defense paradigm? I always forget when I've mentioned it and where.
I don't think so.
Okay, so an offense defense paradigm. If you play sports, then it's very similar to how you would think about it in sports. I'm going to give you a soccer example because soccer makes sense to me. I played soccer for 10 years. Offense, like think of this, you're scoring in the other person's goal, or you're shooting, you're making a basket, or you're making a touchdown, right? So you are like winning. This is a reason why you win. Defense is going to be reasons why the other team doesn't win the round. So this is saving a ball. So like a goalie saving the ball, or a defender tackling and taking the ball, or you preventing someone from scoring a basket, or I don't know. I'm not very well versed in football, so I was going to try and give a football example, but I can't. So it's reasons why the other team doesn't win. So miscellaneous defense might be like, no, you put defense on their internal links. Like they say that this is how the scenario plays out, but they're just wrong. Here's why. It's not necessarily reasons why your AF solves these things. So that's the first strategy. The second strategy that you can read is non-unique, no link, impact turn, and miscellaneous defense. What does this mean? So the non-unique and no link are very similar. So non-unique, their description of the status quo is false. So it might be, so it'll be, Trump is actually going to win the 2020 election, and the plan doesn't do, or the ask doesn't do anything to affect the results of the 2020 election. An impact turn is when you say that, you know, this negative thing that you say we caused, well, actually, that's a positive. So the 2020 disad relies on Trump being bad in office, but an impact turn would say, no, Trump is actually really, really great at being president, and he's the president that we need because he does such amazing things in so many different areas. Yeah, so that's what an impact turn would look like. Does anyone have an idea why you can't read both a link and an impact turn? You can put an answer in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and answer. Or you could just give me a thumbs down react and tell me I'm not explaining this well enough for you to know. I don't know if there's a thumbs react. Okay, so the reason why you can't, yeah, I'll explain why you can't do both a link and an impact turn. And maybe this will also clarify why there are two different strategies for answering this. So a link turn would say that, like, on the 2020 NED convention would say, no, the plan actually makes it so that Trump can never win the 2020 election. But then the impact turn says that Trump is actually really great, a really great president, and we need office because Biden is going to cause all these bad things instead. So now what you have essentially said is we prevent Biden from becoming president, but, you know, Biden is, or we cause Biden, cause Biden to become president, but Biden is actually a terrible president. And so now that's just another reason why the ask is bad. Does that make sense? Let's see, I need to open the chat to see what you're saying. Yeah, it's contradictory. And so this is why, like, you can't read a link turn and an impact turn at the same time. Because if you do that, then it's just like, well, you said this thing was bad and this thing was bad, but two wrongs make a right, is essentially how it works. So don't do those two things together. So now, this was a reminder to myself that I need to switch my screen share now to show you what a block might look like. Can everyone see this? It's a Word file.
Yes.
I can see it.
Okay, awesome. So this is our response to the 2020 neg contention that for last year's policy topic. So it's not going to be specific to what you're reading, but that's okay because it's just to give you an idea of what's happening. So the first thing is talking about how impeachment stumps the 2020 elections. So impeachment is a reason why Trump can't win the 2020 election. So this is a non-unique argument. And then we say the Kurds destroyed Trump's base and splits Republican support. It guarantees a Democratic victory. Guarantees Democratic victory, that means Trump can't win. And can't ever win. So it's a reason why, like, not necessarily non-unique, but why the link can't be true. Because if the link was true, then, like, there's no guarantee of Democrat victory. But this is saying, no, Democrats will win in the 2020 election no matter what. This don't rely on polls argument is saying that, you know, polls are not entirely accurate. You saw that with the 2016 election where people were like, Clinton's going to win the election, and then she lost the election. So this is just a generic argument. It's what we would file under miscellaneous defense. This is like another question of uniqueness evidence. This is a linked defense card. It's saying climate change and healthcare are key to the 2020 election. So what does that mean? The plan doesn't matter. So there's no link to the plan. And so this would be what we call the link turn. Trump needs a hawkish stance on China to use against the Democrats. The key 2020 strategy, the plan stops re-election, because the plan basically looks like we're going soft on China. You don't really need to know what the app does, but that's what this app does. So this would say that, oh, Trump is now looks like it looks like Trump likes China, but then if it looks like Trump likes China, then he's going to lose the election. So this is a reason why Trump now loses the election. And there's no impact defense because a lot of people in policy, at least, believe that the impact on 2020 is true. But you can read impact defense. My team just chose not to. But yeah, so this is kind of an example of how a block is written. This one is more cardy, but what I mean by that is it has more cards than some others would. So let me see if I can show you another one where there might be more. So like if we look at, this didn't jump to where I wanted to. If we look at this other disad, why is it not jumping? Where am I? I want to show you assurance. Okay, if you look at this one, you don't need to know what the disad says, but basically what it's doing is it's taking evidence that you already read in your first Ask Constructive, and you're using that to answer stuff that they're saying in their, answering the neg contention that they read, because you spent 4 minutes talking about your app in your first speech, and you don't want to throw all that away because you read some really great evidence, so you can find ways to incorporate that evidence into this argument. So for this one, it says like case solves the neg contention. And you can explain why case solves the neg contention, and we actually have a specific card that explained why. So that's why we put it in there. Here's another example of stuff that you can say. If you just have ideas, like say you in the round, you all of a sudden realize like, oh, we don't have a card that says that Trump's stance on coronavirus means that he can't win the 2020 election, or Trump's poll numbers have gone too far down because he didn't handle corona well, something along those lines, then you can say it. And as long as you give a reasonable explanation, a judge will evaluate it, even though you don't have a card to back it up. So you can have both a mixture of cards and like what we call analytics. So stuff that you say that sounds smart, but you don't necessarily have a card to back it up. Have a mixture of those when you're responding to things. And then in your rebuttal speeches, you should definitely be using just mostly analytics. Questions? I believe my last slide is actually asking if you have questions. So let me, while I'm waiting for questions to come in on the chat, just some things you should know. You should start prepping on your blocks once camp evidence is released. It should come out tonight. So I would like just keep an eye on the Discord and Google Classroom. But this is kind of how you should start thinking about prepping. Yeah, so that's my lecture. Are there any other questions? No? Awesome. Ishan, you can probably stop recording.